All right, we're back. It is COMP125. It's client-side web development in the summer 2016 semester, and today is the first day of summer. It's week 7, part 1 of our broadcast. So it's supposed to, today is the longest day, the most light we're going to get this year. Nothing new there, but supposed to be some really cool strawberry moon we're supposed to see today. All kinds of really cool. And we were just talking about web domains and so on. If you're going to buy a web domain, again, my recommendation is to make it short and sweet. It has to represent your company, the company you're making it for, or your website. If you're buying one for yourself, like, sometimes people pick their last name, as their company name. That's really hard, right? Because, a lot of times it's taken. I stole mine. I got mine, right? Celiopolis.com. I own it. I don't do anything with it, but, I own it. Who knows? Maybe in the future I'll do a family tree, or something like that, right? But one day they won't exist. Like, you won't be able to find a lot of the websites you want to go onto. But today we're not talking about that. Today we're talking about JavaScript. I know there are some professors out there, my colleagues, who think JavaScript is broken, right? And all that kind of stuff. I know I had some conversations with one of my colleagues. I won't mention who. But JavaScript is not broken, my friends. JavaScript has been created the way it was made for a reason. And we're looking at stuff about JavaScript. I'm making a duplicate of my lesson 6 folder for today, just like we've done in other classes, just to start off. And what I'm going to do here today is drag and drop this into Visual Studio Code. Again, this course does not require you to use Visual Studio Code. You can use any editor you want. And today we're doing a bit of a review, right? And I want to talk about the PowerPoints and how to study for things that you need to do for next class. Remember that our exam, our midterm exam, is happening. We shouldn't call it an exam, but it's probably going to be on the Wednesday, this Wednesday coming up, right? You're laughing at me. 12:30 to 2:30. It's going to be 90 minutes, no longer, right? You'll have a chance to come in, do your stuff, and get out, right? In the 2 hours that you're going to have, approximately, an hour and a half actually, you'll have an opportunity to show me what you know in terms of JavaScript. Here's something you won't need to do. Oh, new version of this, sure, install. You won't need to do your front end. So which means is I won't be asking you to do Bootstrap. You won't have to do HTML. You might have to do a little bit of CSS. I want a beta test, sure. You don't have to do any of that stuff, right? It all will be to do with JavaScript. Like, there won't be any other parts to it. So I'm not going to ask you to form up your stuff or whatever. Things you will have to do, you will have to put it up on GitHub. You will have to do it up on Azure, right? Those two things you will be required to do. Those are going to be worth 8 marks from your exam, right? So just letting you know, you need to do that. If you don't know how to do things up on Azure, or even, let's say, instead of Azure, the school server, worst case scenario, because still somehow you haven't been able to get up on Azure, too bad for you. I think it's important for you to be able to put it up. So those 2 links, you have to have a live link to your site somehow. I recommend Azure, but you don't have to. Let me just do a couple things here. So what I want to do when I'm copying things is, again, just in terminal, I want to kill my .git folder, right? And then I want to initialize. I'll do things from the command line today. Git init. And then git add dot, adds everything. Git commits -m, and then we'll do initial commit. These are all things you should know how to do, or one way or the other, right? And then we need a repository. So I'm going to go up on GitHub, and I want to hit Centennial, and I want to make a new repository here. That's going to be called COMP125 lesson 7. Okay, grab the last 2 commands here, very easy. Again, that's the lazy way of doing it. Plop them in here, paste, man, paste. Press enter, do what you have to do, and connect. Now we have our repository up online that we're going to modify. We've got lots of stuff in here. We'll go through here and fix this in a second. All right, stuff to fix. one thing is our README file is wrong, so that's got to say lesson 7. Today is all around a review, right? This is a review lesson for the exam, midterm exam. Say midterm test. Can't say exam. Exam is a dirty word. That's one thing we have to do. And definitely in our index page, if there's anything else I need to say here, it'll be about that. So lesson 7, it won't be lesson 5. Lesson 7, obviously I didn't change that last week. Review. We'll say test or exam review. Go. Save. All right, let's take a look at stuff that we know, right? One thing is, what's this doing here? I don't know what that's doing there. Log in ASPX. One thing that we have to also think about is the way things connect. So one thing you have to know is how we formed up our folders. Now, most people would know that in my assets folder, I'm going to have things like images. We haven't talked too much about images in this course or any other media content or whatever. Not that we couldn't. We could certainly put together images and media. And on your exam, you will see some images and stuff you'll have to deal with. But I'm just saying that's where we would put them in here. So if I was going to make a folder for images or sounds or whatever, they would go in my assets folder. Now, this is my folder structure. And for you guys, the most important thing to understand is that there is a structure, right? You should keep structured. I've seen terrible websites where there is no structure. So everything is on one route. That's it, right? And you're looking at it going, okay, so where are my files? And a lot of it's because the person doesn't know how to do proper pathing. They don't know how to do a path to go to the assets images folder, as an example. Our content is where you're going to have your CSS. So one part of your exam is to position everything in the right locations, right? So create your content, if you will. You should know about that. Luckily for you, I'm going to have a structure that I'm going to give you. So structure marks are going to be very low. Like it's not really, I'm not going to do a lot of that, right? Scripts, obviously you're going to go your app.js and all of your folders from, that if you're using Bower. Hey, here's a question for you. In this course, other than the lab that we did, is Bower required? No. I'm not going to make you. I'm not going to do it for sure. It's not part of our technology. It's not JavaScript. It's an ancillary technology or whatever you want to call it that helps us grab files from the web and put them in their proper locations without us having to copy paste, right? Notice that my Bootstrap distribution is here and my Font Awesome is here and jQuery is here. And if you're going to look at the jQuery license, so if I was going to go to dist jQuery.js 2.2.4, right? All that stuff is right in here in my script. So these are the content, the folders that we have for our structure. It's important for you guys to know where everything is. We have several pages, right? And what I've done in the past in our scripts is I'm using a page switching kind of algorithm where I'm using this almost like as a menu, right? So depending on the title, and again, there's different ways of doing this. You can use multiple pages or whatever. Depending on the title of the page, I'm launching a different function here. Now, many ways of doing this kind of thing, right? This is definitely one way. And if you notice this idea of document.getElementById, you should know how to do document.getElementById for your exam. If you don't know how to do document.getElementById and create a reference to an element that's on the page, you're going to have trouble on your exam. Just saying, right? You need to do that. So is there going to be inputs and outputs? Absolutely. You're going to have to do things like inject stuff into the page. That for sure you're going to have to do, right? You're also going to have to get stuff from the page. Like for example, in our last thing that we did in our contact page, here's our contact page. We had a little contact form, right? And inside of our app.js, inside the contact area, here's our contact area. We're working with something like getting the value from our page, looking at the contact number and so on. And we were starting to do that kind of thing and starting to validate the form on the page. Now, is validation going to be on the test? Chances are not. We haven't done everything we need to do there, right? But know that you're going to have to get some data from the page. So if I go to my contact form and I want to enter the form, right? How do I disable my default behavior? Prevent defaults, right? Prevent default. So if I was going to do that, and if I wanted to prevent default on the form, not on the button, right, which I'll probably ask you to do, then I'm probably going to go in here into my contact form. I need to make a reference to the form itself, right? Remember, the only way I can affect the form, actually there's many ways, but the main way to affect the form is either to use the form itself. So if I look at the form, this is my contact, right? Here's my nav bar. And as I go down here into my container, I see that I have a form element. Here's my form element. And I've given my form element a name, contact form. Remember last time we were talking about there's many names to there's many ways to access the form. I can use query selector to get, I want to look at what the form element inside my document, the first form element, right? Remember what query selector does, it returns, usually an array of some kind, query selector all. Query selector by itself only returns one item, right? So I could use that to hit the first form in the document if I wanted to, right? Again, this is with no jQuery. On the exam and the test, if you've been using jQuery for your special effects, for your websites and so on, I'm going to ask you not to do that for the test, okay? For the test, I want you to use pure JavaScript, nothing else, okay? So no shorthands, no jQuery, no other libraries, JavaScript is all I want you to use, okay? So example would this be, if I was going to get this, the easiest way we know how is to get a reference to the form is document.getElementByID. We have an ID. We can get an ID, a link to the form itself called contact form. Let's do that. So if I was going to do that inside my document itself, and I probably want to put it before the contact number because that exists in the form. So the proper thing to do is form first, then elements in the form. So var my contact form is equal to document.getElementByID, the name of the form. And again, if you don't remember what the name of the form is, make sure it's correct contact form, right? Otherwise, it won't work, right? So contact form goes in here. And then what this does is, again, it creates a reference, right? Create a reference, for your form, right? That's what it does. And now that I have contact form, and it's been, and again, if I have over in Visual Studio, you can see that it's an HTML element. I can perform operations on the HTML element as if I'm working with the element itself. By the way, this method of working with a UI element, control, whatever, is exactly the same in any language and any control we ever use. We make a reference to the control that's in our UI, our user interface, and then when I have that reference, it's like I can grab onto it, I can do something to that, I can perform actions on it, methods, those kind of things, calculations, whatever I'm going to do, right? So that's the first thing. So get a reference. So next thing is, if I want to prevent my default action, I'm going to do it on submit. So I need an event listener, right? So I'm going to say something like contact form dot, and again, there's different ways of doing this, but the one I want you to use is add event listener. We want to make things submit, on submit, right? So when the form gets submitted, I want to call an event handler or a callback function, right? There's different ways of doing it. One is inline like this, right? With an anonymous function, and I want to pass in a variable called event. Actually, it gets passed in automatically anyway, right? And what I want to do is I want to event dot, prevent default, right? That's what I want to do. Prevent default is a method, right? That's built into events, right? For the submit event, right? So this is one way of doing it. Or if I don't like doing it this way for my prevent default behavior, I could cut this out, right? And down somewhere else in beyond these, these functions, I could have a callback function. I can make a section for callback functions. We'll call this callback functions. Or event handlers functions, right? And this section here will be all where everything is stored. You might want to section off your document like this, right? So I'm going to kind of paste it in here, and we'll give it a name. There's two ways to do a function. You should know all these things too. Var, I could name the function something like, unform submit. I could do this way. That's one way of making it. Same exact function, and I would put the unform submit over here, right? Unform submit. I could do that. Same thing as having it inline. I'm just making it a named function over in here, right? So this function, this is the callback or handler, event handler for the contact form. Submit event. Right? Because that's all it handles, just one little event, right? So I could do it this way. What's the right way to do it? When it comes to functions, and by the way, the other way to write this is, don't use that at all. Just do one of these, right? And this will do. This is equivalent. Right? Those are the three ways. So inline anonymous function, no name, var whatever the name is equal to anonymous function, an alias, right? Or the third way, which is this way, which is clearer for most people who are developers, but they've worked with functions and methods before, where they use the keyword function, they name the function, and then they do the same thing. They're the exact same. There's no difference with them in terms of how they're called. Memory management-wise, the anonymous function is the lightest and most performant. It's the fastest. Because I don't have an extra name that's hanging out there in the cache, right? It's an unnamed function, and it fires or triggers right away, right? As opposed to, I have a space in memory, and I got to call it. I got to go search through my, my cache to find the name of this function, and then trigger it, and so on, and then return data from that function. It's a little bit longer. For us, for the average person, it'll be the same. You won't see differences. But if there's lots of these, and if there's lots of anonymous functions, you have lots of a big JavaScript file or multiple pages of JavaScript or a huge enterprise application with JavaScript, then you're going to see the difference. There's going to be more of a performance. If I make an enterprise level application where I have lots and lots of classes that I've created for JavaScript. Right now we haven't talked about classes at all. Really, we've talked about objects once, right? We're going to handle object-oriented JavaScript next half of the semester, and we'll talk about some tools to help us with object-oriented JavaScript. We'll do it by hand first, and then we'll use something called TypeScript to help us out even more, right? Okay, so let's take a look. So again, we have these two ways of doing things. And to verify, sometimes we want to do some troubleshooting. There's two ways to troubleshoot, right? We're going to talk about debugging as well, right? For example, I could debug and put in a console log command. So I can do something like console log. Remember, we have different logs: console log, console info. Here's a console info, right? And we want to say something like, they all just color the messages a little differently, right? Console warning, right? Different ones. Console info does, we entered on form submit event, right? So we can see that the on form submit event has been accessed, if you will, right? That's a little console. This is one way of doing troubleshooting. If you want to check to see where in the code you are, you use a lot of console commands, and then you read the console and say, okay, I see that I'm here now, right? By the way, it's the same thing we do with C#, Java, Swift, whatever, name the language. We use console outs or login, console commands to find out where we're doing things. Even with things like, if you're programming a game with Unity, we do a lot of debug logs or something like that to figure out what you're like. Okay, so that's one thing we can do. So let's figure this out. So if I was going to go to my contact form, right, and I want to run this thing, again, I'm using a small server. Do you have to use HTTP server for your exam? No, you don't. Right, but it's good for testing. So if I go HTTP server, we talked about this before, and I want to run this on 8080, Savior 8888, whatever it's going to be, right? It's no problem. So localhost 8080, we go there, we can see that we've got this, and I go to my contact form, and now let's take a look at the. You should be comfortable inspecting the form. These are the things you need to do for troubleshooting and so on. So here's my little form, and if I press send now, it's going to stop me because of all the fields that I have in place. So please fill out the field. So there's Tom and my email. There we go. Put a proper thing in there. My contact number, and then a message. Hello. Look how it's doing that. It's counting the numbers of my number of characters. We didn't get to that last time. And if I click send, this is the submit event. You can see that entered on submit event triggers. And I have a little I in there That's the I for info, right? Hey, so it's an info that says entered on form submit event. And I prevented the default behavior. The default behavior would be to clear the form, right? So I need to do that manually. And you're gonna have to do that too. On your exam, I'm gonna ask you to do this exact thing, telling you what to do, right? So you're gonna have to know somehow to clear the form. How do I clear the form out? I could do it one by one, right? So, you know, each of the objects, I have the ability to clear the form. How else do I clear the form? My cancel button won't do it, right? If I click my cancel button, that's not gonna, if I click cancel here, it's gonna take me back, but then I'm gonna lose all my data, right? That's not good. I don't want that. I could create a function, but again, if you were gonna look it up, if I clear form JavaScript, right? How do I do that with JavaScript? Well, look, there's the form reset method, right? So document.getElement by myForm.reset, right? And the reset method itself, what it does, it says it resets the values of all elements in the form. Same as clicking the reset button. Okay, this is good because I can still perform the same kind of functionality. It'll look almost identical on the front end to the person. It looks like the form will clear, right? But I can capture the data. I can capture that data, right? So let's do this and see what happens. Whatever the form is, reset. So I go back to here, and I go back to my app.js. So I prevent default behavior. I want to capture all the data from the form. And remember, my form data, if I was going to capture the data from the form, I have each form element has a name, first name, last name, email, contact number, message, and so on. Yes?
This would be referring to lab 3.
Very similar to lab 3, yes. Yeah, so, but if I'm capturing things like first name, last name, and so on, I'm going to have to, you know, create some code around that, right? Which is capturing the code, right? Now, something like this. If I want to say, if I want to create variables, if I want them to be captured in this document, this app itself, then I may want to declare variables in the anonymous functions namespace in here. By the way, I know you guys were asked recently that, hey, if I make an immediately invoked function by another professor, right? You know, what do I do? What do these extra brackets mean down here, like way at the bottom, right? These extra brackets. How come I have them? Well, without these extra brackets, my anonymous function, this anonymous self-executing closure, right? This closure right here won't fire, won't trigger. It's like it's calling itself, right? We talked about this. I can do that with any function I want, right? I can declare a method, a function, and at the end of my declaration, I could surround this whole thing and the same idea here and self-execute, right? Makes no sense to me, right, to do something like that, but you could. Okay, let's take a look here. So what we want to have is another function, some kind of other event handler or callback function that I want to use, or a utility method, you can call it whatever you like, that reads all the data from your contact form. Maybe like something like contact form capture function or whatever you want to call it, right? But you need variables to store this stuff, right? So again, if you want to store it, you can store the variables in your functional scope. So here, anywhere inside these curly braces, these variables will be like, they'll appear like global variables for all these other functions you got in here, but they're not really global. They're inside, they're captured inside that closure. So anywhere inside these curly braces, if you want that data to be accessible from here to here, as an example, you've got to declare it in this namespace, in this area here, right? If you declare it inside a function like this, it's only available inside remember, scope, a variable lives and dies in that scope. So if I declare it inside of a function, then that variable will be created and destroyed after the function's been executed. We don't want that. We want to capture everything so that it lasts, right? Maybe we want to, you know, pump that out to another page or something like that. And the way to capture that, as long as we're operating, is to create some variables. So we're going to say var, and let's say, for example, we're going to have different elements of the form. We could create an array. The array would be an array of form elements, right? And I could, you know, name the array, you know, 0, 1, 2, 3. But sometimes we want to have some, you know, names that make sense. Like, for example, the first name. So var first name, right? And we want to kind of, you know, create. We don't have, remember, first name is going to be nothing right now, but we're declaring it in the namespace, last name, right? And then what else is there on the form? If we're going to go look there, right? First name, last name, email, contact number, and message, right? First name, last name, email, contact number. We already done that already. And message, right? Yes.
Your message.
Your message is what it's called?
I think you asked on the test, will you be the one giving us the files?
I'll tell you, I'll give you a template. Yeah. But it'll be like the test will be open book, open internet. You can Google, you can lose your notes. The only thing I'd ask you not to do in the test coming up Wednesday is please don't watch my videos while we're going, right? Sometimes people have done that, eh? Can I watch the video?
You guys just put on my headphones?
Watch the video and no, don't do that. You can do everything else but that. That's just a waste of time for everybody. And you're not going to pass. Like if you do this, there's no time for that, right? So, you know, please don't do that. I don't recommend it, right? But you have access to everything. I'm not going to stop you from having access. So if I go back down in here into this contact form, notice that I already have a contact form and I have a contact number. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do the var because I already have contact number that I've defined. So I want to capture it, right? And so I need these variables here, first name, last name, email, contact number, and your message. And these are going to be references to the form, but I'm not going to declare them. I'm just going to declare them up here first as empty, nothing, right? Now, right now, if you notice, if I hover over it, it says the type is any. What are the types in JavaScript? Is it string? No, there's no integer. There's string, number, right? There's Boolean, right? There's any. Any means any kind. You don't know what kind it is. That's what it is in JavaScript. That's what, you know, I mean, some people may feel that that's weird, right? But right now, remember we talked about duck typing. If it walks like a duck and sounds like a duck, it's a duck, right? So JavaScript kind of figures out through implicit typing, different than explicit typing. Explicit typing means this is a string, right? I'm declaring it. I cannot declare things in JavaScript, you know, tell, you know, the interpreter or the compiler what it is. There is no compiler. It's just, it's an interpreted language. It's a script language, right? So right now, because I haven't assigned any value, it's declared as any. If I declare a value, for example, if I go is equal to, you know, the empty quotes, right? Now it's a string. Well, those are two different things. So JavaScript is intuitive enough to understand what type it is. By the way, a lot of new modern languages are using this methodology, as opposed to even C# can do this with the var statement. Try using var in C# instead of declaring it as a string. It'll work, right? Of course.
It will later on be difficult because it cannot determine.
Oh yes, it will. Oh no. It will determine once you declare it, you can never change it in C#. Same thing with last name. Last name would be a string. Email, definitely a string. You know what? Contact number, string, right? And my message is also a string, right? So I've just initialized all my variables. I could have not initialized them. That's okay. Here's something though. Is this accurate? No, because my first name, last name, email, contact number, and your message are all of element, HTML element types. That's what they are. What they hold inside is the strings, the value of those elements. So that's why I don't do this, right? Because if I declare this as a string and later on I redeclare it as something else, you know, we don't want that to happen. But you could, if you really wanted to, you could declare it up here. I could also try and use document.getElementID up here. But what's the problem with that? This is a review, right? Why would I not use document.getElement by ID up here inside this space? Huh? Existence? What do you mean? If it's not there on your extra HTML, this stuff, first name, last name, email, contact number, and your message doesn't exist on every HTML page. It only exists on the contact page. But we're making it exist globally for this file, just for the names, right? But we don't, that's okay, you can do this. But once we start declaring them and I giving them values, right? Then there's a problem. The only place it exists is inside my contact form. And so this is where we do stuff with those things, right? I could have made my contact form global as well, but it doesn't make any sense because we want to contain my contact form in here. But if I want to do stuff like read things, globally, and I want to access my form. So I've read my contact form. You know, I access my, I could do document.element by ID, my contact number. I want to try and do all this stuff inside my contact form method or function, because this will trigger on my contact form only, not on all of them. Otherwise, they'll get an error in every other form, every other HTML document, because they don't have a form. There's only one form in my website, the contact form. And if I try and access that somewhere else, you know, every HTML page is almost like a self-contained little program. I want you to think about that. So if I'm accessing a variable that doesn't exist, or I'm trying to reference an element on the page in a user interface that doesn't exist, I'm going to get an error. And it's going to stop the operation of my entire page, right? These things you must know as JavaScript developers, right? The other option is to make different JavaScript files for each page. One JavaScript file, one page. You could do that too, but that's a lot of upkeep. I'm going to have 5, 6 files, right? For every page, imagine if you had one JavaScript file for every page and you have 1,000 pages. That's crazy, right? That's a lot of pages. So you got to be very careful about that. Okay, so again, here's my contact page, and I have my on submit button for my form, which I'm going to do some operations. I want to make this contact number available to myself. I'm going to make it above this, because once I'm calling this on form submit event, but before I've even declared my reference. Now it'll work, but I don't recommend, right? Even this piece, this on blur event and everything else that we're doing with the length and everything else, let's kill it for now, because that's not really what we want to do. What I want to do is I want to create this contact number reference, right? And I want to do it at the same time I'm referencing the rest of my form. So here's my reference for this. I might as well do it a couple more times, right? Because it's not just about contact number, it's last name, first name, contact number, right? You know, email address, and your message. Those are all the ones I want, right? So I'm making references to them now. So I'll say first name, last name, right? And we'll fix these in a second. I think, what is it? Is it email first? Email, right? Contact number, and your message. And now I got to fix these ones, right? Contact form is okay, but this has got to be first name. Now I'm not sure if I made it first name. You got to be very accurate, otherwise it won't work. So if I go back to my contact page for a second, and I was to look and see what they're called, first name, last name, I was right. Email, contact number, and ID is message, not your message, just message, right? This is bad, right? Either I rename it as your message, or I rename my form. I don't have to, but let's just rename this as your message to make it easier. Your message, right? It's on my actual form itself. Okay, good. Now I'm changing this, so this would be, I'm just making the same names. Do I have to? No, but it's an interesting convention. I mean, it makes it so that there's no confusion. There's advantages and disadvantages to this. We'll talk about later on. There we go. So we've got references to each of my items. Do I have to do it this way? No. I could certainly do it so that each one of these names can be related to the form array, right? Because I have my form array. If I go document.forms0 and the first element, I could say dot, and then the first element of my array. We did that in our very last PowerPoint presentation. Am I going to get you guys to do that on the test? No. I won't get you. We just talked about it, so it's not fair, right? But if you really want to reference it for you to know that it's possible, take a look at that last one we looked at. Yeah.
But do you usually create the reference to the form before the form field, or
yeah,
or after? Or
before. It doesn't really matter, but usually I try and from a convention perspective, I do the form first and then all the containing elements, right? You don't have to, by the way. JavaScript will work either way, but it doesn't mean that it's right, right? So what I said was, if you look at your forms, this is just from the last PowerPoint we were doing, right? Notice that I can say form 0, which is the only form on my document, element 0, 1, 2, 3, whatever the elements are. So I could do it this way as well, because the document itself has a forms array, right? Just letting you know, you can have more than one form. And instead of me doing document.getElement by ID, I could change all of these, like I said, all of these, document get element by ID to document.forms, and this would be forms 0. It's the same thing. I would still have the same reference. I'm still creating a reference, right? There's just different ways of doing it. And there's different advantages here. Here, it's very clear. If you were to look at this and say, oh, I see what the guy is doing, he's making references to all of them. Here, this is a local reference to my contact form that's only inside my contact form, right? Here, these are references to all my other elements that I'm obviously making them available in the this functional namespace, this ifs namespace, this immediately invoked function expression. I'm making anywhere any other one of these functions can access these variables now, because I'm making them available in this namespace. Depends on what you want to do. If you want to use a for loop, some kind of looping structure, go through the array, that's definitely a way of doing it. The only problem is that you won't be able to capture names that are contextual, right? If you did it that way. Like I said, there's different ways of doing it, but and you could definitely switch it on the element ID. There's tons of ways. There's so many different ways of doing the same thing. For us, let's just keep it simple. For your exam, your test, this is enough. Okay, I'm not going to make it crazy. Could you use this? Yes, you could. Right? It's the same thing, but now instead of you know how I did it over here, just to give you an example, I'm just going to do it the same way. I would for the contact form itself, I could do something like this. I could say var contact form. I'm going to put this in. I'm going to comment this out in a second. Is equal to document dot forms, right? 0, because there's only one form. It's the first form. It's the same thing as doing this, right? This is equivalent. It's the same thing. Those two things, right? Because the first form, the forms array exists on all documents, right? Across, it's built in. I don't have to do anything to get this. I didn't make it up. It's built into JavaScript, right? And if that's true, right, this form 0, I could do for the first name, because I know it's the first element, right? I could do something like this. I could say var first name, or just first name itself, because we already have first name. First name is equal to document dot forms 0, right? Dot elements, right? And which one is it? Which element is it? Because if you go back to the elements array, it's the elements array. Notice I'm not getting code hinting here, right? But it would be elements 0, right? Because that would be the first element inside my array, inside my form, right? Form 0. Is it true though? Is this true? Is this the first element? Is my first name the first element in my form? No, it's not. That's where you get tricked. That's why I'm telling you, be careful when you do this, because if I was to go back and look at this, the actual HTML page, the first element on my form, right, is this, right? That's an element. It's a legend element, right? So this is where you get tricked, right? Now, if I go down here and I look at other things, if I go to, here's my div tag, here's my label, these are all elements on the form, right? I could certainly access them this way, but why? That's crazy. I'm sorry, guys. I'll go down and finally figure out which one this is, right? By testing, I can figure what, and then I can try and figure what this one, and this one. It's a lot. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is, so this is, don't do this, right? This is the don't do. The other way to do it is if I wanted to find my ID with first name, but I could also find the first, for my first name, I could find an array of inputs, right? So here's an array of inputs. Remember, because my form has an input. These are all inputs. Watch, except for this one, text area. There's only one text area, but the rest of them are all inputs. So the first input, right, that I find, I could use query selector all, get an array of inputs, right? So again, like this, I could say var input array, right, is equal to document dot query selector all, right? So I want to select all input elements, right? And that gives me an array of inputs. And then from here, I can go in. I probably would put this. Sorry, I probably put this up here. There's an array of inputs, and then I could say my first name is equal to, right, my input array 0. Right? It's my first name. That's accurate. That would work because it's the first input, and my last name is my input array 2, and so on and so on and so on. Keep or input array 1, and then keep going to the last. Your message is equal to query selector text area. right? Because the first text area would be your message. So I could do it this way instead of using document.getElementById. I'm just telling you, there's many ways to do this thing, and it solves different problems. Yes.
So we can use document.getElementByTag name.
You could do by tag name as well. There's many ways to do this. You can also do it by class name. You can make a class for different elements in the array. There's many ways to do this. But the main thing that I want you to get from this, when I get stuff from an input and a form element, one is to put it to, if I want to kind of inject. The other one is to get stuff from. When I'm doing that, what the most important thing is, I need to make a reference. Make it however way you want, guys. But I need a reference to get that, to get a hook, my hooks, so to speak, into that element, and then I can drag content out of it, or I can inject content into it. Okay? Without a hook, a reference to my elements on the page, my UI, I can do nothing. Okay? That's the main thing. And especially if those elements do not exist. If I try and access an element that doesn't exist, my page will have an error. And that's why we do this page switching thing, to make sure that what elements I'm trying to access are physically on the page, right? And I'm page switching by title to make sure that I can access those things. Okay, so let's go back. We'll erase this. We don't need a first array, right? So our input array, we don't need this. We got our first name, last name, email, contact number, your message, and so on. Now, let's get rid of some of this stuff. We did this contact form, add event listener, and we have an onForm submit method, right? Or a function, and I'm calling it down here. Here's my onForm submit. I have access to all of those things. I can say something like this now. I can say first name, right? And I want to capture my first name.value somehow, right? So I want to be able to do that. I want to say whatever my first name value is, I've captured it. And if I want to print them out, if I want to access another form that says display form inputs, something like that. Something like I want to make another function. I want to call another function here that's display form values. That's my function. I don't have that function right in place, but I'll make it down here. So I'm calling it a function from a function. No problem. Here we go. So this is display form values, right? That'll be the function I'm calling. What do I do in this function? I'm going to say something like first name.value. I want to output them. So console log first name value, right? Notice that doesn't come up with my code hinting. But can I do this? Is there a value for my first name? Yes, right? And maybe I want to pretty it up, right? Because I'm going to ask you to keep it pretty, right? So I could do something like this: first name, right, plus first name value, right? And then I could do something else and keep going with the rest of them: last name, email, contact number, and message, right? So this is my last name, right? Email. Trying to keep it pretty here. Contact number, and your message. There we go. So first name value, this would be obviously last name value. On this would be email value, capturing them all. And this is contact number. Again, we're just doing review, right? So you understand contact number value, and this is your message value, right? I'm printing them out. I'm putting them out to the console, and let's add some pretty other stuff here. Console log. Maybe add some of these things here. Surround it with nice little pluses, right? By the way, we're going to probably eventually get into UI stuff. All right, this is nice, but what if, I'm just going to put it out there, what if I wanted to take this information and not just pump it out to the console, but put it into another page? Just saying, right? Or the same page. Well, it is global. These are all global values, right? But let's just say, so let's try this out. So first I event prevent default, and then we'll try this out. Now eventually I want to clear the form, but keep the values. How do I do that? So here's my form. I know. Let's see if it works though. So let's go back to here, and then we'll refresh the form. Start putting our names in. John Smith. Come on, John. All right, and john.smith@example.com. Contact number. And your message is hello from John. And then if we click the send button, and prevent default value and send everything out to the console. Okay.
But you want the message to stay there?
Now, if I click the reset button, and I don't want this stuff gone, right? Let's see what the reset button will do, right? If the reset value clears my values, right? That would be bad, right? If I can't access them somewhere else in the page. Like for example, now if I go to another page, are those values gone? Really?
You made it global.
Doesn't matter. If I go here like this, if I go to About Me, the About Me page, whoo, the About Me page has a scroll to, right? If I go to my About Me page and I go down here in the bottom and I go, you know, first name, right? First of all, can I access it? No, right? I can't access it through here, right? Because my first name doesn't have a way of accessing it because it's hidden, number one, right? My first name is inside my value, right? So inside my my form, right? Now my form itself and my self-executing closure, this iffy structure protects me from or stops me from seeing all the variables unless I share them. And I showed you how to do that last time, right? By creating a name for this function, var app as an example, right? And I can pass an app into the app, that kind of stuff, like this. Remember we talked about this, var app, right? Or I could, and then what I want to do is I want to pass in, I can say app is equal to this, and I want to pass app into the function, and I also want to pass down here my app into this self-executing closure because I need to pass it in as a variable, right? So there it is, and then I save it, right? And now I have to refresh it, do its thing again, little dance, right? It's going to count to 10. And then down here at the bottom, I want to say something like first name. So I'm going to app dot, and it's going to be first name, right? Press enter, it still gives me nothing, right? How come? Because inside my function, right, there is no app first name, right? It's the way you declare it. So if I go back to here, right, I declared all these as vars, and I shouldn't have done that. What I should have done is, because I want to make it into an object, I could have done something like app.firstname and app. If I was going to make it exposed to the outside world, this is the way we're doing it. We're going to hit this next half of the semester. So don't worry if you don't understand what I'm doing right now. But what I'm doing is I'm attaching all of these into my app object, right? By using the name of the object, app, and then creating a variable. And once I've done this the first time and I start assigning it, we're good to go. I can't do this though, down in here, because there is no first name. I have to also do this the same way, app.firstName value, because it has to be the object that I'm accessing, right? So I got to do one of these. I can also use the keyword this. We haven't talked about that too much, but I'm just saying, right? Just before you guys go a little bit crazy, right? And see if you can access this stuff, right? We talked about this as well. If you really wanted to, if someone asked you about this stuff, how do you do it? This is how you do it. Right? So we don't notice how we didn't do that for contact form. It's not something we're exposing. We want to expose the rest of the stuff outside of the closure, right? And now I go back here, refresh, right? And it says, hey, first name. It says uncaught cannot read property first name of undefined, right? So let's go back here for a second and see what the problem is, right? And where it happens, app.firstName. We don't have any definitions for any of these things. This is a problem, right? Because with this structure, we actually don't need this. We define them as we use them. Once we've defined it, it becomes part of the global object. And now if I go here and I go something like in the form app.firstName, press enter, still don't get a value. Because remember we went through all this stuff before, because the app itself isn't something that we're returning. And app is actually equal to an object, which we have to define up here, right? Right, there we go. Are you with me yet? Like, I mean, you know, this is stuff, this is advanced stuff that you may not know. Let's try it again. Or you may have saw one time and you're like, what did he do there? I don't understand, Tom. I'm going to go home crying, right? So app dot first name. Can I get it? If I don't see the code hitting by the way down here, you know that there's a problem, right? Anyways, you get what I'm meaning, right? If I want to expose these things, there's got to be a way to expose them, right? Even with a return. Like, for example, the other thing to do is return. Maybe I want to return certain objects back to the, you know, to my method. I'm return these objects, and I could do something like this. First name, right? First name is equal to app.firstname. I want to just do my first name, right? So now, if I refresh, I have invalid shorthand property initializer, and my line 190, which is right here, right? First name is equal to app.firstname. I'm returning an object, right? And I don't have a way of doing that, and so I could, because there is no first name object, right? See what I'm saying? It becomes more challenging. I keep going and to figure this problem out, but it's not required. For you guys, it's not required, huh? Semicolon? No. This is part of a list, right? For now, I want you to ignore all this stuff, right, that we did, and don't worry about it. So we can't capture it. What I'm saying is, please, if you reset your page, right, we reset your page, what ends up happening is that you lose that data, right? So, you know, at the end of the day, what happens is we don't want that to happen. We don't want your form to reset, right? Otherwise, if you reset your form, you lose everything. All that data is gone for now. In the second half of the semester, we're going to be talking about how do I save my data into a file, right? How do I do that, right? And there's ways of doing that, right? We can save back our data. We can certainly read from our data, but if we want our files to persist, our data to persist, or whatever, either we save it into a JSON file. That's one thing we can do with some kind of AJAX. We're going to use AJAX for that, or you know, we can have a database of some sort that we can access. Am I going to be talking about database access with JavaScript? It's beyond our scope. We don't have time. Not because I don't want to or that I can't. No, this is enough. As long as I'm able to go through the actual page itself and get my data output from you guys, that's enough for now. Because that means I can capture my data. If I can capture my data, I can save it, I can play with it, I can do whatever with it, right? Or I can send it to another form if I want to, right? With my submit function. All right, let's just do this, so finish it off. So I've got my display form values, right, as an example. And what I want to do is now I want to reset my form. So on my form submit, I prevent my default behavior, because if I don't do this, this stops the form. This stops the form from clearing, right, and trying to submit. This is the prevent default behavior, right? This displays the form's values to the console. That's what this does. And the next piece that I want to do is now reset the form, so I can ask for more input, right? So I do that by accessing the form object that I defined, which is my form itself, the contact form, right? So I'm going to say contact form, right, dot reset. Now, if that's true, if I can just do this without resetting the form, without killing all this data, I love it. Let's see. I'm showing you this just in case you look it up on Wednesday and you're like, I got to reset. Tom said to reset the form. Will it work? Right? So I'm going to go back to my contact page and refresh. Right? Notice it's gone. All those errors. And I want to bring them up. I want to bring up the inspector again one more time. And kind of pull this down over here to the console. I want to enter my data again. So John Smith. Notice that we don't have autocomplete. John Smith at example.com should also work. 416-555-5555. My message. Hello from John. I just turned autocomplete off. Send. See how that worked? So I got the data and the form was cleared by using a bunch of functions that I did, right? Function within a function. Ladies and gentlemen, you should know how to do this for your test. If you don't know how to do this for your test, there'll be one section where you miss marks. All right, I'm telling you this is what's going to happen. I'm going to ask for this. Yes.
Do you want us to clear the form and keep the output in the?
Yeah, see how that worked?
So you don't want us to keep the information on.
No, if I enter it again now, if I go something like, you know, some other name, like Jane Doe, right? Jane.doe@example.com and type in her number, right? And I put her message in, hello from Jane, right? And click send. Now, here's her information. Her information has actually been replaced. The original information, which is John, is now been replaced with Joan or Jane, right? And notice I entered my on-form submit event twice, right? Once for each time I click the button. Every time I click the button, it raises, that's what we call it, raises the event, right? And if we have an event handler and an event listener, right? First, we listen for the event. If we've got it in our document, so if I go back to my document itself, right, app.js, and if I'm listening for the event, and the way we listen, of course, is this add event listener. That's one way, or on submit, which is, it's a poorer way. Don't do it that way. But let's just say you could say, I could reform this whole thing and rename it like this. Another way of doing it, contact form dot on submit, right? And then my callback function, right? See, it has the event, right? So I can call on submit, then call the my event on form submit, right? It's the exact same thing. Both ways are the same. This, right? This shorthand that we use is not preferable. The preferred method is this one, add event listener. Okay. So we use this add event listener instead of on anything. We don't want to use on anything. Why? I want you to know the events, the event names. Submit, click, double click, you know, mouse over, mouse out. All those kind of events are the standard events we use across all JavaScript, right? Actually, a lot of them are very similar across all languages, right? Okay, so we've got our contact form add event listener, and because we have an event listener, we can handle the event with an event handler, which is this. This is our event handler, and this, all this little utility method does is display the form values. So again, we can kind of put some you know, basic, you know, comments in here. So this displays form values. Here's a question for you. Am I going to request when you do your documentation, do shorthand documentation like this for methods, or longhand documentation like this for methods? What do you think? It's going to be longhand, right? I'm asking for this documentation for your test, right? So if I was going to redo this, how do I incorporate a shorthand comment like this into longhand, right? What I'd probably do is start putting in my comment, my longhand comment by itself, right? And then copy, paste, cut and paste. So I cut this out because this is just my comment, if you will, right? So I'm going to cut it, put it in here, right? And then down in here, start doing my longhand documentation because documentation is required on your test, right? So let's talk about this. This is add method. Add method is on form submit, right? And then there's no parameter, so returns void because we don't return anything. We don't get any parameters, right? That's what it does. And so I'll do the same thing for this one. So it displays form values, right? That's what this thing does. So if I'm going to do this, the longhand, I'll take this comment here, put it here, right? Get rid of this. Then do @method. Remember, how did I get that? These decorators from UEDoc. That's what we're using just from a convention perspective. Is it the only place to get it from? Absolutely not. Is it the only way of documenting? Definitely not, right? Is it the way we're doing it here in this class? Yes, it is. Yes.
Will you deduct marks if we forget marks?
Yes. There's not a lot, right? I mean, I'm not asking for a lot. Yeah, at least you should be able to do this, right? So go through remember, one part of your test is going to be documentation. So documentation is going to take some points. getting out to GitHub is going to take some points. Putting up to Azure or some of your provider of choice is going to take some points. If you don't know how to do those things, you're going to lose points. There's nothing else, right? Yeah. You know what? I don't want to show you the test. I have it, but I'm not going to show you the test. And I don't know exactly how many, but there's not going to be more than 50 or 60 points. It'll be on the computer. Everything will be online. Just think about it as an in-house assignment that you're going to get. By the way, if you guys are doing C# with me, it'll be the same. I'll have like an in-house assignment. The structured the exact same way as an assignment. The only thing with C# that you're going to get if you're doing the C# piece, you're going to get a few diagrams, right? Because I can't do the same level of complexities with C# that I can do with JavaScript. So you're going to get JavaScript's going to be easier. If you're doing the JavaScript exam on Wednesday, it's going to be way easier than the C# exam on Friday. Friday's exam is more because you've learned more, right, about C#. You've done 2 courses on C#. This is the second one. Therefore, it's going to be more difficult for you because you're doing programming too. But for this one, you know, am I going to ask for this type of comment? Yes, I prefer this type of comment. Why? Because, like I said to you before, we can convert these comments into API documentation with the right in the right setting, right? Yes. No, I'm not going to give you something you've never seen before. I won't do that. So it's all stuff you've seen. If you can do what I've asked you to do, you're going to pass your test and you'll do well. If you can't do what I've asked you to do, God isn't going to help you by Googling, all right? You just won't have time, right? There'll be too many things to do, and you won't have time to finish it off. So please understand how to get input from your you know, from the document and send input to the document. Yes, you'll have your files, your project files will have to be submitted to eCentennial. All right, let's go on to other things before we question more. One thing I may get you to do for your test is I may get you to do some debugging, right? Something might be broken and I want you to fix it. All right. Remember, there's a couple of techniques we just talked about. One is console logs, console infos, console warnings, all those kind of things you can certainly put on here. The other thing that I might want to put on is I'll get you guys to do, and again, this is a great thing to do, is if you hit sources, so again, there's elements, console, and sources down here. Sources. Right, here's my sources. What you could do is I could inject stopping points or, you know, debug points in here right inside my document. So an example of that would be if I want to show the value of the form. Let's say, for example, I want to put a stopping point here, right? So not down here, but here, right? Let's get that rid of that. So wherever you click, whatever number you click here, it'll actually put in a stopping value. Notice I can't do it on the form. It's on the method, right? I can't do it here on the method name, on the method signature. I can't do that, but I can do it inside the method, right? So these are debug points, and we do this through the gutter, right? Yes. So let's say I want to know each of these values. So here's in my gutter. I'm going to put this debug point on, right? And then I want to watch this form go. I refresh the form, right? Notice that the debug point did not go away, right? And it's wrong. Means it needs to be down here. Let's try that again. Refresh the form. There it is. And then I want to look through all this stuff here. Okay. How do I do that? Well, in the contact form, first let me enter all this stuff. So I'm going to go, you know, Tom Jones, my email, tom.jones. You want to test, right? Example.com. And here's my contact number. There we go, that'll work too. And then my message, Tom. There we go. And then what I want to do with here is click send. Now notice that when I click send, it's going to go through, this is what our expected functionality. It's going to go through, right, into the contact form. Once that contact form, it's going to declare all these variables. It's going to give them values, right? And then inside my contact form event listener, it's going to trigger the event listener. It's going to go into this is what we expect to do. And then finally, it's going to display everything. Yes? But hoisting happens when you declare variables. Let me just go through this. So let's click the submit button and see what happens. So send. Okay, now see the debugger is working right now. This is built in, it's working, right? So if I pull this up now, I can step through each one of these lines. And the great thing is on the right, look what it gives me. Here's the actual line, this is the breakpoint. And here's the scope, and it gives me local values. For example, in my closure, I have my about, my contact function. This is the closure, the values in my closure. And I want to really look at things like my email and so on. Right now, it's just latched onto these things. So if I want to know the value of the next item, so here I'm gonna go kind of step through. It's gonna go through my all my stuff here. Let's just step over this stuff. Continue. Go back to my app.js, right? And notice that, let me try this again. So refresh. And if notice there's no value, but I've got a stopping point. And the reason why we did all that stuff is for another reason. So tom.jones at example.com. You got to put all this stuff in, right? Which, there we go. And click send, because it puts me into debug mode. And again, I can start inspecting each of these items. Now there's different things. I can go step over to the next function call. I can step into the function call, right? So if I step over, it goes to the next one, right? This is what I want. And now, have I declared a value for my first name? And if I can actually look at my console at the same time. Look, each line by line is being handled, right? So if I go to my sources, I've just executed line 191, and I'm going to execute line 192. I haven't done it yet. Okay, let's execute line 192. Done. Let's take a look over here. You can see that I've returned my first name. So one line by line, I can step through my entire code, right? And at the same time, if I want to know what it is, I can look through my contact, right? If I want to. Here's my prototype function. Here's my functional scope inside my closure. And I can go through each one of these things, right? Like my first name, right? If I look through my first name, here it is right here. And I can see the value that it has, right? So you can actually inspect every item that's inside your document by clicking into it. Right, so if I go all the way to the bottom, right, where I have a value, here's my value. Right? So you can actually inspect every element, what it is, the size of the element. It'll tell you all kinds of information, the scroll width, scroll height, read only if it's true or false, the whole pattern. Here's my pattern. Remember we did that pattern thing? It'll actually put the pattern in play and everything else. Okay? Everything but everything you'll know, right? As well, because that's inside my closure, right? Inside my contact form. We also have stuff outside my closure, which is my first name. So I can actually do that too. I can go to first name, and I can go down to value. The value of my first name is Tom, right? So I can inspect every element in here, and as I step through. So if I go down to the bottom, right, I should have all of these values here now. And if I look at my console, I do. So one by one, I can see where I'm getting my error or what the values are. And debugging like this is a great way of stepping through. Do it both ways. Yes? What function? Because this is the header, right? The function calls where I want to click on. For example, I can always call on contact form reset, right? I can add in a debug slot right here, even when I'm going. So let's keep going. If I kind of go here, and now I'm here, right, into my contact form reset. If I want to step into my contact form reset, I'm going to see all the stuff that's going on the back end in JavaScript, right? And it'll kind of understand what my form does. See, content script. This is not me. I didn't do this, right? Something that's running in the background that has nothing to do with me, right? And I can keep going through this whole thing. It's going to keep going through over and over again, and then until it's done. All right, so we've just talked about a couple of, just refreshing your memory of a couple of ways of debugging, right? And ways of getting information. And how do I put information on the form? The same way, but we're going to do that. Let's take a short break, and then I'll take the form data, and as soon as you enter the form without doing anything, I'll put it right back into the form itself. Okay, let's try this out. So let's take a short break and get back.